Are you ready to start growing dahlias? I'm going to tell you everything you need to know to get started today. Hey everyone, I'm Erin, the Impatient Gardener. I garden here in zone 5B, 6A, southeastern Wisconsin, and I've been growing dahlias for a really long time, and they are certainly one of my favorite plants, if not my very favorite plant. Now, dahlias have a bit of a reputation of being something of a diva plant, and while they aren't exactly like a set it and forget it plant, they aren't difficult to grow. And what they bring to a garden, which is amazing flowers from often the middle of summer all the way through till frost, especially later in the season when you really need something, bringing some color to your garden. You really can't beat them. There's so many dahlias out there, and it's really a broad range. You can get dahlias that grow 12 inches tall. Some of them, these especially like the big dinner plate flower ones that have flowers that are the size of a dinner plate, those can get up to 7-8 feet tall. With so many different varieties of dahlias, it's a little difficult to generalize about what they will do. But in general, smaller ones with smaller flowers will produce more flowers, and larger flowered ones will produce fewer flowers throughout the year. I'm going to put timestamps in the description, so you're here for just one little piece of information. You can go straight to it by following those timestamps. Now, dahlias might seem a little bit confusing to you, but my guess is that many of you have had experience growing a plant that behaves very much like a dahlia in terms of what it wants. And that's a tomato. Tomatoes and dahlias have a lot in common. So if you think about what a tomato wants, that's usually what a dahlia wants too. The most common way to grow dahlias is from tubers. And when you buy tubers, you might get them in a little clump, or you might buy them as a single tuber. And they will always have a little part of the neck of the tuber attached, because that's where the eyes come from. And the eyes are where sprouts are going to come from. And as long as you're buying from a reputable source, you should be able to have no problem. They should have eyes on them, and they should be fine. So tubers should be firm. There shouldn't be soft spots or any sign of rot. They should feel very much like, again, a potato. Don't worry too much about the shape and the size of the tubers, because just like there are many varieties of dahlias, there are also many shapes and sizes of tubers. And the size of the tuber is not necessarily related to the size of the flower or the size of the plant. Now, there's two ways to plant these. The first way is to plant them in the ground directly where they're going to be growing. The second way, which is common for many of us in sort of cooler zones where we're not going to be able to get our dahlias in the ground as early, sometimes we will pot these up ahead of time to help them get started a little bit early, and that way we usually get flowers a little bit earlier. Now, regardless of which way you're planting these, the process of planting them is the same. You want to bury these about 3 to 6 inches deep. Generally, deeper is better for warmer climates where these are going to be able to overwinter in the ground, but as long as you're in that range, you're good. Then we just put the tuber in the hole at a little bit of an angle or on its side, and then the next thing that happens is we put the stake in it. I will tuck that up right up against the tuber, stick that in the hole so that it's nice and firm, but not obviously piercing the tuber, and then we just cover everything up. But don't get too excited and rush out and plant your tubers in the ground right now, because it might not be the right time. Dahlias are frost tender plants, and they don't tolerate cold at all. And they really don't tolerate cold and wet conditions. So it's very important that your soil is warm enough before you plant them in the ground. I like to see a soil temperature of 65 degrees before I plant my dahlias, and that's at the depth I'm going to plant them at. This happens to be about the same temperature at which you might think about planting out your tomatoes, by the way. Now, there are many places you can grow dahlias. I like to grow mine in the middle of my garden as any other garden plant. Some people like to grow them in rows because they just think they're prettier that way, or easier to manage, or they're using them primarily for cutting. And containers are a great place to grow dahlias, although I will say that the really, really tall dahlias are probably not well suited to a container, strictly because they need a lot of staking. Now, dahlias like part sun to sun conditions, so don't try to push these into shade because they won't perform well for you. Now, these are plants that just pump out flower after flower after flower. So any plant that does that really appreciates a good amount of nutrition. And again, this is very much like a tomato. It's producing a lot, so it needs some nutrition. So adding some compost or organic fertilizer to the area where you're planting them can really be helpful, particularly if you've got kind of lean soil. But do make sure that you aren't using a fertilizer that has a lot of nitrogen in it. So that's the first number in the NPK. Whenever you look at your fertilizer, the first number is always for nitrogen. Just make sure that that is not higher than the other numbers that are there. Even more important than that is the drainage. Dahlias are never going to be happy sitting in wet soil. So if you have soil that doesn't drain really well, you are going to need to amend that with something to lighten that up. And that could be leaf mold, or compost always works great, but something to get things draining nicely. Now, much like a tomato, dahlias want consistent moisture. They don't want to get soaked and then dry out. They just would really prefer nice, even, consistent moisture, but well draining so they're not sitting in wet. So that means in some areas you might have to think about doing some supplemental watering with these, but in other areas you don't. So when I grow them directly in my garden with my garden plants, I don't come and give them any supplemental watering unless things are getting really dry and I see other plants kind of flagging, and they manage fine. The other big factor with dahlias is staking. Dahlias produce big flowers that can be heavy, and even though many of them have very thick stalks on them, they will tip over and they will break. So I'm telling you right now, stake before you think you need to stake. And I stake all of my dahlias that get over 24 inches tall. Some of the ones that I grow that are shorter in that 24-inch range have single flowers on them, so they don't have big, heavy flower heads, so they manage pretty well without staking. But anything over that, just stake it. And the best time to stake them is at the time of planting, so that you don't end up spearing a tuber when you try to stick a stake in later. So once your dahlias have started growing and have started putting on some good foliage, there's one more step that is really helpful to take, and that is pinching. This is obviously a dahlia that I potted up and was growing, but you can see that's about 10 inches or 12 inches tall at this point. And what I'm going to do is take it back to here, and I'm going to pinch this out. I'm just going to go right to here. You can use a scissors, you can use a pruners, you can use your finger, it doesn't matter. And what pinching does is produce a bushier plant that will produce more flowers. And I will do that on every stem that's popping up, and I will do it just once. So here's a plant that I pinched back about a week ago. You can see I pinched it to here, and this is what happens. See these two new branches that have shot up, and that's, you can see them actually, some more have shot up in between here too. So you get more branching. So you get two branches where you pinch. Just make sure you pinch right above a set of leaves. Now, pinching will delay blooming just a little bit, which is why you only pinch once, because if you keep pinching back and keep pinching back, it will continue to delay your blooming. And of course, we want the flowers. Now, your plants have started blooming, and this is the moment you've been waiting for. This is why we grow dahlias. In order to keep them blooming, it's important to deadhead them. It can be difficult to tell a dead flower from a flower bud that's about to open up, but the easiest way to look at it is that the dead flowers are triangles and the flower buds are round. And once you know that, it becomes fairly easy. But when you deadhead, don't just nip those little dead buds off. Go down to a set of leaves. So take your pruners and cut down to a set of leaves. If you are growing them and you would like longer stems, cut deeper. The deeper you cut, the next flowers that come will have longer stems. And your dahlias are going to bloom right up until frost. Now, I'm sure you've heard that you have to dig your dahlias. Well, that may or may not be true. If you're in zone 8 or above, you don't need to dig your dahlias. You might be able to get away with it in zone 7, and I've even had some come back here in my zone 5B 6A garden, although you're definitely taking a chance on it. Now listen, like I said, there's a huge variety of dahlias out there, many places to get them, and once you get into them, you tend to get a little bit excited about getting this variety or that variety. But many great varieties can be picked up at garden centers for no more than the price of a 4-inch annual that you might buy. And if that's the case, don't feel guilty about just letting them go. Think of them as an annual, and it's fine. You don't have to dig your dahlias in order to enjoy them. Just think of them as annuals. Now, if you do want to save your tubers and you are going to have to dig them to store them, don't worry about it. I have videos on how to do that, but I wouldn't worry about that now, and I wouldn't let that stop you from growing dahlias, because growing them as annuals is a great way to think of them. Okay, that's all the information you need to know to start growing dahlias, and I hope you give it a try, even with a couple of them, because I think you're going to love the show they put on. If you found this video helpful, give it a like and subscribe so you can follow along with all the dahlia goodness that's going to be coming to this garden this year. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Flowerbulb.eu for partnering with me on this video. Flowerbulb.eu is the source for information and inspiration about all things related to flower bulbs.